The Superstition Mountains cover roughly 160,000 acres east of Phoenix, and somewhere inside that wilderness sit an estimated 2,500 archaeological sites. Almost none of them have names. Most people who drive out from the city see one thing: a jagged volcanic wall with a gold mine legend attached to it. What they do not see is a stone ring near the summit that federal law now forbids anyone from digging into. A cliff dwelling where the builder's fingerprints were still visible in the mud as late as 1948. A treasure map carved in stone that experts believe was cut with a modern power tool. And at number 1, a living sacred mesa that the United States government has already scheduled for destruction. Welcome to the channel, where we go looking for the places history left half explained. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now, because we dig up stories like this every week. Today we are counting down 13 ancient sites in and around the Superstition Mountains that still do not add up. Let's get into it. Number 13. Hieroglyphic Canyon. The canyon named after the wrong civilization. The trailhead sits at the end of a residential street in Gold Canyon, Arizona. Stucco houses, HOA landscaping, a 40-space parking lot, 10 minutes of walking, and you are out of the subdivision and into true wilderness, following a boulder-choked canyon a mile and a half deep. At the end of it, pools of water sit in the rock year-round, in one of the driest mountain ranges in the state. Above those pools, on dark basalt cliffs, are hundreds of petroglyphs, spirals, human figures, animals, symbols nobody has decoded. The Hohokam came here for the water and left their marks on the stone for generations. Then, centuries later, American settlers arrived, looked at carvings they could not read, and reached for the nearest word they had for ancient writing. That word was Egyptian. Hieroglyphs are a formal writing system from the Nile. What is carved into this canyon is not writing at all. It is petroglyphs, and the two things have nothing to do with each other. The name stuck anyway. It is on the U.S. Geological Survey map. It is on the Forest Service sign at the trailhead. This is the single most accessible ancient site in the entire range, and its official government name is, in the most literal sense, wrong. Number 12. The Peralta Stone Maps, the treasure map that can't spell. In 1949, 4 carved stone slabs turned up in the desert near Florence Junction, Arizona. 3 sandstone tablets and a heart-shaped 4th stone that fits perfectly into a matching recess. Within a decade, they had become the centerpiece of the biggest treasure legend in the American West. Supposedly, a map left behind by a wealthy Mexican mining family named Peralta before they were massacred in 1848. Here's the thing: there is no documented Peralta land grant in Arizona. No record of a wealthy Peralta family mining gold there in the mid-1800s. The names carved into the stone, Pedro and Miguel, are about as common as names get. An expert who examined the tool marks concluded they were made with modern equipment. The Spanish on the stones contains mistakes that suggest whoever carved it was working from a dictionary, not a first language. Arizona's leading historian on the range called their origin dubious at best, and yet nobody can definitively prove a fake because there is no way to date a chisel mark. 75 years of books, television specials, and decoding theories, and no one has ever found a mine by following them. The stones are on public display in Apache Junction, still drawing people who want to believe. Number 11. The Paradise Spring Overlook Stone Circle, the second one. Everyone who researches this range eventually hears about Circle Stone, the famous stone ring near the summit. Almost nobody hears about the second one. In 1993, a Forest Service recorder named Charles Vernon walked up to a smaller ring of stones on a high overlook, 70 feet across with a stone pile at its center, wrote a short note comparing it to Circle Stone, and filed the form. Then it sat, untouched, for nearly 2 decades. It took a community college history student named Chris Allen, searching the Forest Service archive for anything within 5 miles of Circle Stone, to pull the record back out. 2 expeditions followed, in 2010 and 2012, hiking in from remote trailheads to photograph and finally map it. It has still never been excavated. Vernon's own filed report speculated that, like Circle Stone, it might have been ceremonial. Nobody has confirmed that or disproved it. A second ancient stone circle in the Superstitions, was rediscovered not by a hiker stumbling onto it in the wild, but by a student reading through a filing cabinet. It remains one of the quietest, least visited places in the entire range, reachable only by a rough forest road and miles of trail after that. Number 10. Gila Pueblo, the millionaires who moved into the ruin. In 1928, a retired New York stockbroker named Harold Gladwin, along with Winifred Jones McCurdy, whom he later married, bought land near Globe, Arizona, that happened to contain a 14th-century Salado Pueblo ruin. Gladwin had spent 2 field seasons in northern Arizona with the archaeologist A.V. Kidder and come away obsessed. So he and Winifred did something unusual. They did not join an institution, they built one. They excavated the ruin and then constructed their research headquarters on the exact same spot, reusing some of the Pueblo's own ancient walls in the new construction. From that hybrid building, part 14th century, part 1920s, they ran what became one of the most consequential archaeological operations in American history. Between 1928 and 1950, the Gila Pueblo Archaeological Foundation sponsored the exploration of over 8,000 sites across the Southwest, excavated the famous Snaketown site, and defined cultures archaeologists still argue about today, including the Hohokam and the Mogollon. Emil Hari, later one of the most important archaeologists in the region, started here as assistant director in 1930. The foundation dissolved in 1950. The building was eventually declared federal surplus, and in 1972, it became a community college campus. Today, undergraduates sit exams in a building made partly of 800-year-old walls, and most of them have no idea. Number 9. The Klein Terrace Mound. Excavated because it was about to drown. The Klein Terrace platform mound sits in the Tonto Basin, dating to somewhere between AD 1280 and 1400, and it is now one of the most thoroughly documented ancient mounds in the entire American Southwest. Here's the wild part. Nobody studied it in detail because anyone wanted to. They studied it because the government was about to flood it. Phoenix needed better flood control, which meant raising Theodore Roosevelt Dam, which meant raising the lake behind it, which put close to 600 archaeological sites directly in the path of the rising water. Federal preservation law would not let the Bureau of Reclamation simply drown them, so it had to pay to excavate first. What followed was an 8-year rescue archaeology program, beginning in 1989, run by Arizona State University, racing the reservoir across dozens of sites. Klein Terrace was one of the ones that got saved as data. Archaeologists there mapped not just the ceremonial mound itself, but 3 surrounding villages and 2 smaller hamlets, giving them a complete picture of the community around it. The mound survives today mostly as an extraordinarily detailed excavation record, because the alternative was for it to survive as nothing at all, underwater, alongside the hundreds of sites that were not so lucky. Number 8. Schoolhouse Point Mound. 5 towns emptied in one generation. Platform mounds in the Tonto Basin were not houses. They were public architecture, raised, walled, restricted structures that anchored a community. In one stretch of the basin called Livingston, there were 5 of them. Then, in little more than a single human generation, 4 of the 5 went dark. Excavations directed by Owen Lindauer in 1990 and 1991 caught the moment in the stratigraphy at Schoolhouse Point Mound, sitting on a mesa above a sweeping bend in the Salt River. The people from those 4 abandoned mounds did not scatter. They appear to have rebuilt around this one site instead, consolidating a whole landscape of separate communities into a single center of gravity. The researchers themselves described this stage as extremely short-lived and said they were excited to have captured it so clearly. Within another century, the entire Tonto Basin was empty. Nobody has settled on why. Drought, flood, conflict, or a political system reorganizing itself right before it collapsed. What survives is the record of the moment, everything narrowed to one point, on one mesa, above one bend in a river, right before it all went quiet. Number 7. Apache Leap and Dripping Springs. The cliff the mining company gave back. Above the town of Superior, Arizona, a near-vertical volcanic escarpment rises out of the highway. Most visitors know Apache Leap for a 19th-century story about warriors choosing the cliff over capture. That story is not ancient, and it is not the reason this entry made the list. The real reason sits underneath the legend, a genuinely older archaeological landscape, and at nearby dripping springs, ancestral Apache petroglyphs still visible on the rock above running water. When the mining company Resolution Copper set out to secure the enormous copper deposit under neighboring Oak Flat, it spent a decade in tribal consultation. The outcome was strange. The company shrank its land request by nearly 1,000 acres and formally gave up its private ownership and mineral rights to more than 800 acres of Apache Leap, permanently placing the cliff under Forest Service protection as a special management area. Resolution Copper itself describes Apache Leap as containing one of the most significant Western Apache archaeological sites in the entire region. A multinational mining company handed a mountain back. It did not, as we will get to shortly, hand back Oak Flat. The petroglyphs at Dripping Springs are still there, above the water, exactly where they were left. Number 6. Besh-Ba-Gowah, the woman who dug up a city during the Depression. 1 mile southwest of Globe, Arizona, on a ridge above Pinal Creek, sits a 200-room stone pueblo built by the Salado between roughly AD 1225 and 1400. In the 1930s, with the country in economic collapse, federal relief programs put unemployed men to work on excavation crews across the Southwest. One of those crews, on this ridge, was led by a woman named Irene Vickery, at a time when it was extremely difficult for women to hold official positions like hers at all. Under her direction, roughly 200 rooms and more than 350 burials came out of the ground. What she uncovered became one of the reference sites archaeologists still use to define the entire Salado culture. Here's the detail that stops people cold. The name on every sign at the site today, Besh-Ba-Gowah, is not what the Pueblo's own people called it. It is an Apache phrase meaning place of metal, coined for the mining camp of Globe, which was built 6 centuries after this Pueblo was already empty. More than 350 people were buried on a 2.5-acre ridge, and the town has been walking around wearing someone else's name ever since. If you have been enjoying these so far, drop a thumbs up and tell us in the comments which of these 13 sites you would actually want to hike to yourself. We read every one. We are only about halfway through this list, and it is about to get considerably stranger. Number 5. Tonto National Monument, the Lower Cliff Dwelling, saved by a president building a dam. Overlooking what is now Theodore Roosevelt Lake, a cave 363 feet wide holds a small stone pueblo built by the Salado starting around 1300 CE. About 40 to 60 people once lived among its 20 rooms. Construction like this continued across the basin until sometime between 1400 and 1450, when the entire population left and never came back. For centuries, the ruin simply sat there, dry, protected by the overhanging rock. Then, in 1906, an engineering project arrived that had nothing to do with archaeology. The federal government began building Theodore Roosevelt Dam in the valley below, and President Roosevelt, who had signed the Antiquities Act into law that same year, used it to place these cliff dwellings under federal protection before construction could touch them. The dam that reshaped the entire valley is also the reason this ruin survived the 20th century intact. Today, it is the one site in this whole countdown you can walk into without a permit or a guide. A paved half-mile trail, self-guided, open year-round. Stand inside the cave, and you are looking at a village that outlasted the people who abandoned it by roughly 6 centuries, saved, in the end, by the same kind of construction project that emptied it in the first place. Number 4. Tonto National Monument, the Upper Cliff Dwelling. They wrapped it in foil and watched the fire come. This dwelling holds about 40 rooms, 32 at ground level, and 8 to 10 on a second story, inside a cave 70 feet wide and 80 feet high. What survives inside is remarkable. Partially intact roofs, wooden door lintels still in place, third-story parapet walls, the Salado used as open-air balconies over the basin. It is one of the few places in the Southwest where the wood is still the original 700-year-old wood. In June 2019, that made it terrifying. The Woodbury Fire started near a trailhead in the Superstition Wilderness on June 8th and grew to over 124,000 acres. The 5th largest wildfire in Arizona history. burning through country so rugged firefighters could barely reach it on foot. As it closed in on the monument, staff made a calculation. They could not stop the fire, so they would armor what they could not replace. On June 19th, volunteers packed the visitor center's museum artifacts and shipped them off to a conservation lab in Tucson. Archaeologists climbed the switchbacks and physically wrapped the upper cliff dwelling in fire-retardant material, the same way you would wrap a house. The next day, they wrapped the lower dwelling too and lined the visitor center with hoses. Then everyone evacuated and waited. 88% of the monument, 989 acres, burned to the ground around it. Neither cliff dwelling was damaged. You can still visit, but only by reservation, only November through April, in small groups. 3 miles round trip with 600 feet of climbing. The monument actually protects 5 cliff dwellings. The public only ever sees 2. Number 3. Rogers Canyon Cliff Dwelling, the fingerprints in the mud. In 1948, a boy named Tom Collenborn hiked into a green, spring-fed canyon in the Superstitions with his father and found a salado cliff dwelling in close to perfect condition. The roof was almost entirely intact. In the dried mud of the walls, the fingerprints of the people who built it 600 years earlier were still visible. Collenborn went on to become the leading historian of this entire mountain range, and he called it one of the finest original salado structures in the whole Southwest, never reconstructed, never repaired. The dwelling once held around 65 rooms and storage areas, probably home to as many as 100 people, before everyone left the Tonto Basin sometime before 1450. Here's what makes this different. Most of what he saw in 1948 is gone now. Not from time, from visitors. By Collenborn's own account, more damage happened to this site in the following 30 years than in the previous 800. People climbed on the walls, people climbed on the roof, people chipped off pieces to take home. And because the canyon sits inside federally designated wilderness, the Forest Service is legally barred from installing the one thing that might have saved it: an iron grate over the cave mouth. The rule written to protect the place is the same rule that leaves it defenseless. What is left today is a 2-room dwelling and a ground-level granary, reachable only by an 8-mile round-trip hike with no water and no signage beyond a single warning sign. The fingerprints, presumably, are still in the mud somewhere. Nobody is checking. Number 2. Circle Stone, the ring nobody is allowed to dig. Just below the highest summit in the Superstition Wilderness sits a stone ring, roughly 133 feet across, with a perfect square structure at its center. Nobody knows who built it, when, or why. That is not an exaggeration for effect. It is the literal state of the evidence. The only mention of this site in any written record before 1975 came from a University of Arizona student in 1941 who never actually walked up to it and dismissed it as a Mexican goat corral purely on the word of local cowboys. That single, unexamined judgment is roughly where formal archaeology on Circle Stone stopped for the next 35 years. Pilots kept reporting a large circular ruin from the air through the 1960s. Rumors spread through Apache Junction. It took until the 1970s for anyone to find a horse trail up to it. Several archaeologists finally visited after 1980, and each one came away with a different theory. A Native American ceremonial site, a Spanish stock corral, even a circle built by the mountain's famous hermit. And then came the final twist. The Superstition Wilderness designation permanently closed the area to all archaeological excavation. The one tool that could actually answer the question, a trowel in the ground, was legally taken off the table. About 80% of the wall has collapsed, likely from earthquakes over the centuries. Some mapping work suggests the ruin may track the equinox sunset over a distant peak, though even that alignment has been remeasured more than once with different results. A structure 130 feet across, with a perfect square at its heart, sitting on the roof of an entire mountain range, and by federal law, no one is allowed to find out what it actually is. Number 1. Oak Flat, known in Western Apache as Chichil-Beal-de-Gotil. You come up out of Queen Creek Canyon on Highway 60, past the mining town of Superior, and the road levels out onto a high mesa thick with emery oak trees, real shade in a state that offers almost none. There is a campground here, and it has not been empty since 2015. Somewhere nearby, Drilling equipment is already running. Wind moves through the oak leaves. And underneath it, if you listen, there is a second, mechanical sound that was not here 10 years ago. This is not a ruin. Every other place on this list is something people left behind. This is a place people have never left. Western Apache girls still complete the sunrise ceremony here. Families still gather emery oak acorns and medicine plants their grandparents gathered in the same spots. A tribal expert has called Oak Flat the best set of Apache archaeological sites ever documented. It was protected from mining for roughly 70 years, until December 2014, when a rider was quietly inserted into a must-pass defense bill authorizing its transfer to Resolution Copper, a company owned by two of the largest mining corporations on Earth. Underneath the mesa sits an estimated 40 billion pounds of copper, and beneath it, a vein worth mining by a method called block caving. You undercut the deposit from below and let gravity finish the job. Over the following decades, the ground above is expected to collapse into a crater more than 1,000 feet deep and close to 2 miles across. Apache Stronghold fought this all the way to the Supreme Court, which declined to hear the case in May 2025, over a dissent from 2 justices who called the refusal a grave mistake. In March 2026, the Forest Service transferred the land anyway. As of this writing, 4 lawsuits are still active, still trying to undo it. Wensler Nosey Sr., who has led this fight from the start, has said his own granddaughter faces a rite of passage her sisters already completed, and asked the only question that matters. If Oak Flat is destroyed, how will she know how to be Apache? Every other entry on this countdown asked what happened here 1,000 years ago. This one asks what is about to happen here in the next few decades, and nobody watching this video yet knows the answer. The superstitions are stranger than their reputation suggests, and most of that strangeness has nothing to do with lost gold. For me, it is circle stone, a ring on top of a mountain that the law itself forbids anyone from ever explaining. That is the one that stays with me. Let us know in the comments which of these 13 surprised you the most, or if there is a site out here we missed entirely. If you want more deep dives into places history left half finished, subscribe. We post one every week.